Sims was the brother of the Sims that was the Admiral Sims of the Shenandoah thing. He followed Kershaw's and forced the 5th Corps Division to break to the rear, leaving a gap in the Federal line. The Confederates took the wheat field only to collide with troops of Hancock's 2nd Corps. Zook's brigade went forward over the retreating Federals. If you cannot get out of the way, lie down and we will march over you. And that's exactly what they did. Right over the backs of their own, because they were trying to retreat. The Confederates fell back to the Rose Farm, rallied, and with reinforcements from Wofford's brigade retook the wheat field. It changed hands 6 times after the fighting. You could walk across the wheat field on bodies and never touch the ground. Federal line finally stabilized in the woods to the right of the wheat field, back over that way. Any questions about here? Horrible, terrible fighting. From here, we're going to the peach orchard.
Peach orchard,
Yeah, peach orchard.
Only
Two more stops for today.
painting of him just before he's bayoneted. He's retaking the colors.
Mm-hmm. Okay, everybody's got it.
Question.
So this is the peach orchard, and yeah, it's a commanding eminence, but you're too daggum far out from support. So this is where Sickles came to. I just wanted you to see this. Any questions? Dan Sickles was from New York State. He was I believe he was a senator. And he was in his late 30s before the war, and he married, I guess you would call her a trophy wife. An 18-year-old, very beautiful girl. Smart man. Well, he got down here, and as we would say today, he didn't tend business. So she started looking around. He did not mind that until some of his buddies in the Senate and the House of Representatives started, we know what your wife is doing. We know what your wife is doing. You're being cuckolded. And that got to him. So he found out who the cuckoldee was. Philip Key. Son of Francis Scott Key. Everybody remember Francis Scott Key?
Yeah.
Anybody not know Francis Scott Key?
He wrote a song or something.
Yeah. He wrote a poem that became a song. So what he proposes to do, of course he's a lawyer, but he proposes out on the line there in front of the White House one day, he has a 5-shot revolver and runs in to young Key, shoots him 5 times, reloads the pistol, shoots him 2 more times, kills him. Of course, he's charged with murder. He hires him another lawyer. The lawyer's name is William Stanton. Anybody remember that name? William Stanton.
Secretary of State.
He became Lincoln's
Secretary of State.
All these people know each other. So Stanton proposes the novel defense of temporary insanity. He was driven out of his mind. Well, and he wins. First time that defense of temporary insanity is ever that's tried and won. It's been tried before, but nobody buys it. Now, here's the modern, and this is what they taught me in the law of concealed carry. If you're shooting somebody and you stop and have to reload, you've had time to calm down. And so if you shoot anybody anymore after that, you lose the temporary insanity plea.
Yeah.
So Sickles gets off.
What was Terry Bigger magazine?
Yeah. And it was interesting after the war, you know, and we're going to, I'll wait, we're going to go down after the point where this happens. So anything else about up here on
So Sickles is sitting here.
the what?
Sickles guys are here.
Yeah,
Who's here?
nobody,
And who's on the other side?
nobody.
Okay.
He's stuck out like
That's what I'm
as they
saying.
say, he stuck out like a sore
All the
thumb.
Confederates up here.
Yeah.
In that tree line.
Yeah,
And that tree line waiting to
and they're
come
coming across
right here.
all, away, coming across to here.
Yeah.
And of course,
As well as the wheat field.
the attack by echelon has not gotten all the way down here yet. It's coming. They're coming. They're coming. And here, just a little quick thing while we're here. Over on McLaw's left, McLaw's over here, Brigadier General William Barksdale Brigade launched their attack toward the peach orchard. He was impatient to begin and pleaded with Longstreet. I wish you would let me go in, General. I will take that battery in 5 minutes. And Longstreet told him, wait a minute, wait just a minute. We're all going in presently. So remember I said that there was 2 ways to send this attack in, by time or distance. That comment leads me to believe that it was a time interval. Not positive, but a response like that kind of lets me believe that it was a time interval. Okay, Sickles will, okay, I need to wait on that. I'll go ahead and say it while we're here because it fits in. Now, 3rd Corps starts to crack, the Federal 3rd Corps starts to crack a little bit. Sickles was, and we're going to go by where Sickles was shot. He was shot cannonball right through his leg, and it pretty much takes it off except a little bit of tendon just holding it. Of course, he's off his horse, and it's marked down there where he's, and we'll drive by there when we leave here. As he was carried to the rear, he calmly smoked a cigar to let his troops know he was not dead. Barksdale's brigade took over 1,000 prisoners and 4 cannon, but Barksdale was mortally wounded. His last words were, "Tell my wife I'm shot, but we fought like hell." Only Brigadier General Andrew Humphrey's division of Sickles' Corps withdrew in good order back to Cemetery Ridge, but the cost was heavy. Over 2,000 of the 5,000 men in his division. Federal salient began to crack as its left rear in the wheat field had collapsed also. On down toward the left of the Confederate line, the blows continued to fall. Brigadier General Richard Anderson's division of Wilcox's and Lane's brigades continued to push the Federals back toward Cemetery Ridge. A large gap developed in the Federal line between Little Round Top and Humphrey's division. If the Confederates could break through the gap, the Federals would be divided and defeated, but the Federals were able to scrape together several artillery batteries, and they fired canister into the Confederates, slowing them until the brigade from 2nd Corps finally filled the gap and stopped the advance except for Wilcox's brigade. So, now something else is going to happen in a couple of minutes. For right here though, let's ride around, get on the road and cut back down, and then we're going to turn to the left. There are being units pulled from everywhere else on the battlefield to go down here. And that part of that brigades and echelon attack is working to a pretty good degree because it's sucking the Union Army all down this way, back to the Round Tops, back to the wheat field, back to the peach orchard. They're sucking them all that way. They're pulling units that are from up here, from over on Culp's Hill. They're sending them all over here fast as you can. In fact, there's some position, we'll see that in the morning when we go over to Culp's Hill, that the Union forces had dug trenches there and they were abandoned. And Confederates are going to find them abandoned. We'll talk about that tomorrow as we get out.
Yeah, I remember that.
So they are stripping the field, and it's not a whole lot left of it. It's just a bare minimum of Federal troops. Yet these brigades are continuing to let's see. So, sensing the crisis was coming, General Hancock said in some way the 5 minutes must be gained real long. So this is right in this area. Hancock looked about and saw only one small regiment nearby in order, Colonel. And you see those colors, and it was Confederate colors coming right through down here. This little bottom through our front. You see those colors? Then take them. 1st Minnesota, 262 men.
lieutenants in the unit said every man realized in an instant that order meant death or wound to us all. The sacrifice of the regiment gained a few minutes' time and saved position. The 1st Minnesota stopped the Confederates, but only 47 men were left. The rest of Lee's attack now fell apart. Some brigade commanders refused to go forward because of a misunderstanding of orders. Now, what this was you crossed from Longstreet's Corps to A.P. Hill's Corps, and there was not appropriate coordination. This happens in the modern army, so we try to be sure that everything is coordinated to prevent stuff like this from happening. Grant's not one of my heroes either, but one of the things Grant did is whatever order was prepared, he wanted the dumbest lieutenant in his army on his staff. And he read orders. If he could understand them, they were okay to publish. If he didn't understand them, make them simpler. It worked. It was a great idea. So you do your coordination, and that's one of those things. In the modern army, you stress all of that stuff. And this is these little lessons. When I do it up here for the military, a lot of officers and stuff, I teach these things. This is lessons, and this is why you do staff rights. There are all these lessons that, even though uniforms, tactics, whatever, weapons have changed, there are certain truths that never go away. They're the same. And that's what we try to get across. See what happens when you don't coordinate. So here's what happens. Dorsey Pender was prepared to send his division forward. It stopped before it got to his division. And he said, I know the plan. We're supposed to keep going. What's going on? So he gets on his horse and he rides down. He's over here, so he's riding down the line to find out what's happening. And while he's riding down there, a federal artillery shell lands close by and wounds him in the leg. Takes him off his horse. Now the wound on the surface does not appear to be too serious. He is evacuated to the rear, put on a wagon, and sent back toward Winchester. En route, the leg becomes infected, which leads to an amputation. And the amputation kills him 3 hours later. Lee said, among other things, had Dorsey Pender remained in the saddle 30 more minutes, I would have won the second day at Gettysburg. Because Pender was pushed. A lot of people in their mind said, with a little bit more seasoning, Dorsey Pender would have been the next Stonewall Jackson. Dorsey Pender was good North Carolina, down around the Wilson area. So the attack stopped. See what?
Pender County's name.
Yeah, Pender. Now that's the county that's probably, if the woke people get it, that's the county that's going to have to be renamed.
I know.
Along with Lee County, along with Vance County, Hope County.
Town of Zebulon. But
Yeah.
your ancestor would have been with Pender had he not been wounded the day before. And had Pender lived, he would have been in the National Camp.
Yes, he would have. Yeah.
But now he's in a hospital.
Yeah.
Brigade hospital.
So, with this, was the attack breaking down and stopping, except for some winding up of stuff in here and winding down for the day, just getting over toward starting to get dark. The action on this side of the field is over for the second day. There is so many almost and nearly happened over here that it's just stunning. Almost. You can go points, place after place after place after place. Almost. Not quite, almost.
Okay.
But this was a battle that nothing really went right for the Confederates at a crucial moment. Nothing. say one more thing about tomorrow's battle while we're still here, because I don't want to leave you hanging on this one. I'm trying to get him off my back. You know,
We need casualties and the mystery horse.
remember, Ewell was told when you hear Longstreet's attack go in, launch yours.
Yeah.
Nothing's happened over here. The battle's been going on for 3 hours.
Oh, is that the?
What do you think happened? It's not that far. It's only like 1.75 miles across here.
In there a sound effect? There's some, you call it
An acoustic shadow.
Yeah, that's it.
That's one of the reasons you see some of these housing developments and put a big berm out by the highway road.
Yeah.
It's bounce the sound off.
Yep.
And the sound will bounce up somewhere else. It'll come down. Sometimes many, many miles away. My house is an example. I can hear the artillery from Fort Bragg. Whenever they fire, I can hear them right in my house, just like they're in my backyard.
Yeah.
It's an acoustic shout. People in Bloomington don't hear a thing because the sound jumps and it comes down. This is what happened over there. We'll talk about that tomorrow when we get back over there, because we're going to start over and we'll finish up the second day over there, and then we'll pick right up, because the beginning of when they heard Longstreet's, but because of this acoustic shadow, Ewell heard nothing until around 6 p.m. He commenced his attack with an artillery barrage from Benner's Hill, and that's the one that's over here. Over here. But Federal artillery soon drove his guns off. Most of the Federal 12th Corps had been pulled out to reinforce the Union left along Cemetery Ridge. So a lot of these Federal units had been stripped and gone to help back over that way. Major General Edward Johnson's Confederate division crossed Rock Creek and surged up the hill and occupied trenches vacated by the Federals. Skirmishes from Stewart's and Walker's brigades advanced almost to the Baltimore Pike, whose capture would have doomed the Federal positions near Gettysburg. But the main body stopped in the trenches because of darkness. And some of the Confederates thought this must be a trap. You know, there's nobody here.
Yeah.
No Federals here. What's going on?
Yeah.
So over on Cemetery Hill, which is over here, you see the cemetery behind us over here. Jubal Early's division began its assault. Moving across 700 yards of rocky ground, brigades of Harry Hayes and Isaac Avery began their attack on the left side of the hill. And we're going to go over, we'll go by there a little bit later, but I'll talk us through this. Colonel Avery fell after routing the 1st Union line. And of course, our guys in the 6th North Carolina are very fond of Colonel Avery. And when he fell, and this note's in the Museum of History, and it's you can tell he's dying, because as he's writing the note, the writing gets worse and worse, and he's bloodstained. And he said, "Tell my father I fell with my face to the enemy." And years later, Winston Churchill. You want to say it?
I was going to say that it could have been General Hope
Yeah,
instead of Avery.
yeah. Because Hope was wounded at Chancellorsville,
Chesterfield.
so Avery took over.
It took over, and it's very likely that it could have been Hope instead of Avery. dying.
It could.
I've seen that note. Our docents in the Capitol were able to go to the museum, go in the back room, and actually see that note.
Yeah.
And it really brings goosebumps.
It is. And Winston Churchill, no slouch himself. He'd seen combat. Of course, he was Prime Minister of Great Britain in World War II. He said it was the bravest note he had ever read.
Yeah.
And Major Bill of 21st North Carolina wrote in that, like an unbroken wave, our maddened column rushed on. 4 or 5 color bearers went down. The hours of one of horror. The Confederates surged up over East Cemetery Hill and 11th Corps started to break and run again. Major General Rhodes did not support the attack by not attacking West Cemetery Hill. He conducted a personal reconnaissance in the early darkness and saw that his side of the hill was covered with several batteries ready to fire on any attacker and well supported by infantry. In the increasing darkness, federal reinforcements finally arrived and began assaulting Early's division. After repulsing the several attacks, the 2 brigades finally withdrew in good order from Cemetery Hill. Again, had this position been held, the Union Army would have been decisively defeated. And with this action, the day's battle had ended. Now, we'll talk a little bit about what happened during the night over here. And since it's raining and we're under cover, we'll just stay right here for a few more minutes. Take advantage of dry ground. Okay, now Meade held a council of war that began around 11 p.m. that night and over at the Lester House. And we rode by it this morning. In my kind of a roundabout, I missed a turn. And
I was gonna say, where are we going?
We're doing the scenic route.
anyway, the leaves on the trees threw me. That's So he held this council of war, and the main question was if the Federal Army was to remain or retreat. Most of the generals advised to stay, but launched no attacks at Lee. Lee finally decided that they would remain in place, and he told John Gibbon, who was a division commander in 2nd Corps, and told him, said, if Lee attacks tomorrow, it will be on your front. And why? Asked Gibbon, and because Lee has made attacks on both our flanks and failed, and he will conclude to try it again, it will be on our center. And you thought, wow, the guy knows exactly what's going to happen. But by 9 o'clock the next morning, he had changed his mind and said, Lee's going to hit our flanks again. So anyway, a little more on that meeting. Again, he asked them 3 questions in his council of war. Under the existing circumstances, is it advisable for this army to remain in its present position or to retire to another point near its base of supplies? And he polled his corps commanders. And Meade did this correctly. And if you think about the logic behind how he asked the corps commanders, he started with the most junior man first and worked up to the senior man. You know why he did that?
No.
If you start with the top guy, everybody else is going to think, I better agree with it. You know, that's the military. That's the military. So he did that correctly. All right. So here's how they went. Gibbon, junior man, stayed. Williams, stayed. Burney, stayed. Sykes, stayed. Newton, stayed. Hancock, stayed. Sedgwick, stayed. And Slocum said, stayed, but kind of rectify our positions a little bit, but stay. So it was near unanimous, without equivocation, we stay in place. It was a good defensive position. Second question, if being determined to remain in place or in present position, should the Army attack or wait the attack of the enemy? All said to wait, no attack. Good. And the third question, if we wait, for how long? And most of them said at least one day. At least one day. Let's see what Lee's going to do. Okay. Now, with that done, they said about getting ready for the third day, July 3rd. So here's what.
Fred, that was the end of the second day?
Yes. Okay. Right. July 2nd.
That was the meeting of the union.
Yes.
Are you going to mention what happened in Lee's meeting? Or?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Later on.
Okay, I got you.
Before we get on to the other side.
Okay.
Okay, now, While Meade had no intention of launching a major attack, he did order an assault to retake the threatened Culp's Hill. During the night, he returned the 12th Corps to the area, and at 3:45 a.m. he opened with 4 batteries of artillery on the Confederate positions. After 45 minutes, the shelling stopped in preparation for the Federal attack. But as soon as the firing stopped, Johnson's Confederates surged forward, forcing back the Federal skirmish line. The Federals quickly rallied and drove the Confederates back. The battle raged across Culp's Hill for almost 5 hours. Finally, around 11 a.m., a Federal counterattack fell on Johnson's left, and the Confederates retreated back across Rock Creek, which is down here. Except for the cavalry action approximately 3 miles east of here, and that's at East Cavalry Hill, and I normally don't go out there. It's not that much to see. The fighting on this side of Gettysburg was over. For decades afterwards, the trees on Culp's Hill would be bare of limbs and bark, a stark testimony to the desperate fighting on this hill. In an irony of the war, Corporal Wesley Culp, who grew up on the Culp farm just north of here, and I can see it when there's no leaves on the trees, but it's right down there anyway. And he went south to join the Confederates, was mortally wounded, and died on the farm. Some say he died on the steps of the house. Got back to there. Now, that kind of concludes what happens over on this side. Tell you what I'm going to do. While we're here, this is a good spot. We're dry. I'm going to talk about Lee's plan for the day. Now, Lee had tried the flanks of both sides of the Federal Army. He now thought them weak in the center. He wanted Longstreet's corps to hit Cemetery Ridge just north of Little Round Top, with Ewell's corps attacking simultaneously around Culp's Hill and Cemetery Hill. And this should divide the Federal Army and cause it to retreat. General Jeb Stuart's cavalry would ride around the extreme left, this way, and catch the Federals in the open and destroy them. Already by daylight, part of his plan had been unraveled, and the action by Meade over here took Ewell out of the fight again. So that took that part of the plan out. It's not going to be coordinated again. Once again, whatever the Confederates really tried to do, it got stymied. So Lee met with Longstreet and told him of the plan. Again, Longstreet was not real happy. Eventually, Lee proposed sending General George Pickett's division, Pettigrew's now division, who commanded Heath's division. He'd been wounded, so Pettigrew was commanding the division, and Major General Isaac Trumbull, who was now commanding Pender's division. And this was totaling about 12,500 men. And Lee thought it was about 15,000, but the casualty reports for the first day and second day had come in and were not accurate. So he thought he had 15,000 men. He only had about 12,500. With units from Hill's Corps, the attack point would be shifted slightly north, away from the Round Tops. So all units would aim for the copse of trees along the center of Cemetery Ridge. Longstreet was again disappointed that his plan to move around was rejected, and Lee said, "The enemy is here and I'm going to strike him." Longstreet replied, "General, I have been a general or soldier all my life. I've been with soldiers engaged in fights by couples, by squads, companies, regiments, divisions, and armies, and should know as well as anyone what soldiers can do. It is my opinion that no 15,000 men ever arrayed for battle can take that position." So as they rode along Seminary Ridge, they passed Brigadier General Wofford, who had almost broken the Federal line yesterday. When Lee asked him if he could do it again, Wofford said, "No, General, I think not." And Lee said, "Well, why not?" And he said, "Because, General, the enemy has had all night to entrench and reinforce. I had been pursuing a broken enemy, and the situation is now very different."
So at around 9 a.m., the divisions began forming in the woods behind Seminary Ridge. Artillery from 1st Corps, 80 guns, and 3rd Corps, 63 guns, began to place themselves to fire on Cemetery Ridge, concentrating the fire on the copse of trees. As Lee rode through Pettigrew's and Trumble's divisions, he said, "Many of these poor boys should go to the rear. They are not fit for duty." He said, "I miss in this brigade the faces of many dear friends." Brigadier General Richard Garnett told Lewis Armistead, "This is a desperate thing to attempt," and Armistead replied, "It is, but the issue is with the Almighty, and we must leave it in His hands." So Longstreet's artillery chief, Porter Alexander, placed in charge of all the artillery and was told by Longstreet that when the Federal batteries were silenced, to let him know so the attack would begin. So we're going to...
What's that? Okay. Yeah. You guys introduce yourselves. I need to bring Kevin.
If y'all need to pass me, just let me know at one of these landings.
Out here for popcorn.
And I'll let you go by. Yeah, they're getting ready to go down.
Easier going down than coming up.
Oh, yeah. Just take it easy.
This is the top of Cemetery Hill. This would be considered East Cemetery Hill, right around the ridge here. And if you remember, I was talking about on the evening of July 2nd, Robert Rhodes' division did not participate. Rhodes' division was back here in the edge of Gettysburg, and they were supposed to participate in the attack, but he went out and made a personal reconnaissance. And up here in the darkness, he could see several batteries of Federal artillery. Here we are. And for those that didn't hear, each of these little mounds of dirt that these cannon are behind are called a lunette, and it was to give cover to the artillery so they're not under total fire. And there was also a lot of infantry here, and he said it would be suicide to make this attack. It may well have been. So he declined to attack on the evening of 2 July. Now, this position, you can see what a commanding position this is up here.
Yes.
And if you were Confederate infantry attacking, look what you would have to come up against this. You can debate whether Rhodes was right or wrong, but it would have been deadly for him to launch his attack up this hill. It would have been very, very difficult. Now, let me give you a little bit on attacking enemy cannon if you're an attacking force. Of course, you want to take the guns out, and there's several ways to do that if you can get to them. The first thing you want to do is try to shoot the crew down. The guys manning cannoneers, shoot them down. Second thing to do is if they're the horses that are pulling the guns, shoot them down. And the third thing you can do is shoot the spokes out of the cannon wheels so that the gun collapses. And that's the way to kind of immobilize a gun if you're attacking. One of the other things you could do if you just shot the crew down, maybe the horses, if you could take the gun, most of the men, even the infantrymen, had a basic understanding of firing an artillery piece. Somewhat not unlike a musket, except just a whole lot bigger. And it was called, if you took the guns, turning the cannon, which was very common. And that gave an attacker a great aid in taking enemy's position if he could turn the gun. So they would come up, actually just turn the gun around and point it into their former owners. Load the gun and fire. Artillery was a horrible thing to face, and you know,
we always think about attacking guns, and to me, it looks like if I was going to attack Civil War times, you know, you don't go in shoulder to shoulder because you're inviting canister. How would I attack them? Put everybody in skirmish. Just kind of spread out. Some people are going to get it, obviously, but you have a whole lot chance of getting everybody wiped out with 2 or 3 well-placed canister rounds. So this is up here, East Cemetery Hill. The Confederates never took it. And you can see that if the Confederates did, Baltimore Pike, they'd have gotten Culp's Hill and could cover Baltimore Pike. It was going to be pretty much over in this. The Federals would have had to totally withdraw and get out of here as fast as they could if that had happened. Unfortunately, it didn't happen. Just a couple other things while we're over here. There's the famous gates to the cemetery here. And I always love that picture they made of the cemetery. I mean the gatehouse up here that said "No guns allowed" during the battle. No guns allowed. The cemetery was started in 1854, so it was a civilian cemetery, and of course this was part of it was picked as the place for the National Cemetery for burying a lot of the Federal soldiers that fell here. There's also a section that's a modern National Cemetery, so if you're a veteran, you can apply to be buried here if you so desire. Okay, we've got another general over here. What happened to him?
Got wounded.
Got wounded.
Got wounded at least.
If you want to, we walk over there and look at him. And I want to look at this cannon again. I've forgotten the significance of that cannon right there. It's upended. Generally, it means it's some general or somebody was either wounded or killed there. So we can do the
Fired, obviously.
Well, no.
Because the fuse hole, or where you pull the lanyard, is jammed. Did they carry something that they could jam down there and bust off?
And that's, I knew I was forgetting something.
Spiked the gun. They spiked the gun.
It's spiked in the gun. And that was the original owners of the cannon. In their kit, they carried a big spiked nail.
Yeah.
And if you couldn't get that gun out of there, and you had the opportunity, it's called spiking the gun. You would take that spike in the vent hole where you put the fuse in. You put that spike and just big hammer and jam it as hard as you could down into that gun, and it would temporarily disable the gun. And what you had to do is to get it repaired is get it back to your ordnance people, generally at a battalion or brigade ordnance trains, and they could get that spike out and rebore and fix the vent hole. But it would temporarily disable the gun without
Getting turned.
it would be turned on you, and the enemy probably wouldn't try to haul it off because they couldn't use it. I mean, they may eventually if they took the ground completely.
Right.
But they would. Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, Don.
The gunners up here were fighting even with rammers and screws and things that are gun implements.
Anything you needed.
From like this side,
Got more room in the pack.
Yeah, I think I might be able to squeeze one more back. I think I need to come up here and put some more potato money in that way there.
right one. It's not near as big as it used to be because a lot of the trees have died. But there it is. And it was a point where everybody over here could see where it was, so you would know this is where we're all headed to.
Yeah.
No concern about that. Now from here, there were now federal batteries on Little Round Top that had the range to get to here. And of course, the Federals were all aligned along the hill there. And pretty much they were all lined on the crest of the hill instead of, like we say, the military crest. They were not really down much lower. They were pretty much on the crest. The North Carolinians were here. This was where East Division, now under Pettigrew, was, and Trimble was going to be behind it. It's kind of a second line. And that little neck of woods that sticks out, the other side of that's going to be Pickett's division down that way. So there's a gap in here. And part of the plan is that as they marched out, and of course all morning they were lining up in these woods here, getting ready to go. And the cannon were being placed and all. And of course, the Federals over there could tell something's up. You know, it's hard to hide all these artillery pieces coming and getting up here and all the activity they're seeing. So they're getting up here, and the plan is that as they go out, when the attack for the infantry to advance begins, they're going to start coming out. Now Pickett's division, which is down this way, is told to come out, and we'll go down there and talk a little bit more about, but they're going to do what they call left obliques. You know, go out a certain part of the way in oblique and come over a little bit, forward, come over a little bit, where they would eventually, by the time they get to the Gettysburg Road, are going to be joined together with Pettigrew's division. And they would all go in together with Trimble right behind, which was Pender's division, right behind Pettigrew's going in. And the place where the assault would pretty much go in is the North Carolinians are going to go in right at the angle, and the Virginians are going to go in right before the angle goes. Now, there was a signal gun given at 1:07 p.m. that started the whole thing. Now, this is one of the things that, you know, still it troubles me as a soldier that Longstreet told Alexander, the artillery commander, you tell me when I can launch my attack or this attack. So you've got basically a 3-star, well, what would have been a 3-star general, 2-star obviously, but you've got a corps commander that's in overall charge of this attack telling a colonel the responsibility is yours. You don't do that. You don't do that.
Then Alexander said, not on your life.
No, he does. He accepts it because he's a good soldier. So at 1:07, the artillery barrage starts. And I think it's fairly well depicted in the movie Gettysburg. It just fired right down the line and continued to go. Now, how loud was this? They heard this in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania.
I've heard people say there was rumblings that they could identify as far west as Gettysburg.
It might have been.
This was probably a rumble.
This was probably the loudest event, except for maybe prehistoric volcano activity on the North American continent up to that time.
How many guns were up here?
100 and, let's see, I think it was 140 some guns. It was a great number because there was all the guns from 3 Corps and all the guns from 1st Corps were here. One of the first shells hit near Meade's headquarters, and of course that's right over the hill. Now this is one of the things that's interesting
and the firings. You know, these guns, you see the artillery pieces, and you see the trail is on the ground. And the Federals were right along the top of the ridge. So when you're firing, you have a very narrow streak that you're aiming at, where the enemy is. And every time the gun fires, it recoils. They roll the gun back in position. When it fires, it rolls. And what's that trail doing? It's digging.
Yeah.
So what happens to the elevation?
It goes down slightly.
Well, no, it goes up.
The wheel
goes in.
So what happens to the shell?
It goes higher, or it goes longer.
So it starts going over because the enemy is right along the very crest of the hill, instead of what we in the military call the military crest, which is down a little bit. And those shells started going over. And of course, one of the first ones hits Meade's headquarters. And he has an aide that he's eating lunch with his generals. They said an aide was serving butter to several of the generals when he was cut in half by one of the first shells. It blew him right in half. That affected lunch?
Slightly.
So as the firing continued, more and more of the shells went over the ridge into the rear areas, and the men call these things quartermaster hunters because they were going over into the rear areas where the supplies and everything was. Major General Hancock rode along the line to steady his men, and one of his men came up. Of course, you see it in the movie. This little what's his name? That did the mine just went totally blank. Ken Burns was dressed as a little federal orderly. General, you know. Said the Corps commanders ought not to risk his life this way, in which Hancock replied, there are times when a Corps commander's life does not count. But Hancock had done everything he had done. He had placed his troops, he had put them there, and what he was doing was being a good commander. He's letting his men see him, and he's there with them, which helps steady the men.
He wasn't in the woodpile.
Yes,
He wasn't in the woodpile. I was about to say
or
that.
he wasn't in the back drinking liquor or something.
Yeah, right.
Okay. So the Federal artillery began to give counter battery fire into the Confederate guns, and some of the shots, the guns were kind of out here, the infantry's right back there. So some of the shots crashed in among the infantry. And one of the soldiers said it was simply awful. Great big stout-hearted men prayed loudly too. And then there was a little humor in all of this. One of the men turned around, a rabbit bolted out of the stuff and went to the rear and said, "Run, old hare, run. If I was old hare, I'd run too." Yeah. So at around 2:30, the Federal cannon on Cemetery Ridge was being fairly badly mauled, and before the reserve batteries came up, Brigadier General Henry Hunt, the Federal artillery commander, ordered the guns to cease fire and withdraw, hoping that Confederates would think that all were silenced to conserve or to conserve ammunition. So now Alexander, and this was a great faux pas over here. Alexander was the tactical commander of all the artillery, but he was under Pendleton, the overall artillery commander, Lee's artillery commander. And Pendleton had ordered all the ammunition trains sent way to the rear for protection and to reload. So all of a sudden, the Confederate batteries are starting to run low on ammunition. And seeing this, Alexander sent the following message to Longstreet, who had told him, "You let me know when." Said, "For God's sake, come quick. The 18 guns are gone. Come quick or my ammunition will not let me support you properly." So this is the next crisis in this, is that the guns are starting to run ammunition, so it's now or never. So from here, we probably, well, I could do it here, either Virginia. We could either go down to Virginia Monument or talk here a little longer.
Talk here a little longer.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we are here in front of North Carolina.
So here we go.
Go down to Virginia Monument.
Do what?
No, just
You might be put on provisional status from the SEV camp if you keep that up.
That's
He outranks me. He's
Oh, no,
division
not
quartermaster.
Yeah, okay.
Oh yeah, I'm quartermaster. I
Okay.
outrank him.
That's
I'm
right.
capital brigade commander. I outrank you.
It's true.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, and remember, I normally when I do this, I'm at the Virginia Monument. So from this position, that's just where Lee observed the attack going in.
But
it was
isn't that
also-
where, what's his face was? Pickett?
Yeah, Pickett was a little bit farther
On the
down.
other side of that tree line.
Yeah,
Yeah, but I mean, but he was
in that area.
in that area.
Yeah.
Near Lee.
Uh,
Let's stop there when we go anyway, right?
So it was from this position, Lee, and also this is from where Lee met the survivors when they came back from the attack.
Right, yes.
Over in Pitzer's Woods, Pickett asked Longstreet, "Shall I advance?" And Longstreet could only nod. He can't even tell him yes. Then Pickett says, "I'm going to move forward, sir." And then Pickett rode to the front of his division and said, "Up then and to your post, and don't forget that today you are from Old Virginia." He told his commanders, "Advance slowly with arms at will. No cheering, no firing, no breaking from common to quick step. Dress on the center." Now, for you non-reenactors, there's a lot of information in that command. So here's what it is, and this is one of the things, you know, I was doing these tours before I was reenacting, and there was a lot of these commands and stuff that, but once I started reenacting, it just, okay, that makes sense. And I mean, you understood it. So it says, advance slowly with arms at will. It meant you could carry your musket any way you wanted to. It was no prescribed way. They had a long ways to go. No cheering, no firing, because that would slow you down. No breaking from common to quick step. Now, a common step is a slower step, much easier to walk. The quick step is a little faster, and it's a little more structured, and it tires you out quicker to do the quick step. And then of course you dress on the center. Everybody stay on your colors. Those on the left of the colors look to the right and keep pushed in. Those on the right of the colors keep, I think somebody's whispering me whenever that goes off. And so you look to the left and push to the left. You know, stay in tight as you're going across. And of course, you know, you're shoulder to shoulder. Now, I don't know about y'all, and this is where the North Carolina, they stepped off from here. And there are a lot of times the Park Service, at least us, when we're up here doing a living history, will let us advance from here and march across. There's a spot over there in front of the Virginia Monument. This is a narrow trail that Park Service allows most people. That's where you walk. But for us, and we'll go across in line of battle. And if you've never been able to do that, that's a stunning thing.
I don't know how many times I've done it, but every time I've done it,
It's
colors are blowing.
it's gut wrenching, and I always like to tell people, I said, you know, looking out across there, these men knew what they were headed into.
Yeah.
And I like to think of myself as having average bravery. I don't know if I could have crossed.
Well, I would have. If my brother
you
was
would-
crossing, I damn sure would have with him.
But you had to go because
Yeah.
all the people around you
We're going.
were going.
You knew
They
every
were
one
your
of them.
family.
Yep.
They were your friends, neighbors, and you could not have gone home.
Yeah.
Death
Yep.
before dishonor.
Damn right.
Yep. So
Damn
you
right.
went. So you went. And you went across here.
But being at the other end, seeing you was coming,
Yeah.
I would have scared the bejesus out of me too.
And they started moving out across here, and from the federal side,
Damn
they
sure
were
would've
stunned at what
Made you
they saw.
crunch up tighter than a snare
They had
drum.
never seen anything
Waiting
like
for it to
it
get there.
coming at them.
Yeah.
And a lot of the federal commanders, they knew they had a little time, so they would get their men and stand them up there, because the artillery stopped once they moved out. Our artillery stopped. So they had the men up, had them do the manual of arms, just to steady their nerves, you know, and things of that nature. whatever a commander could do to help calm his men, because they could all see what was coming.
About how many Confederate troops were lined up around here?
There were 12,500.
It was what, a mile?
No, it's a little more
Not
than
quite
a mile.
Not quite a mile.
Not quite a mile?
Not quite a mile. Because remember, some of these units are already suffered pretty heavy casualties. Only Pickett's division had been unhit. And he always said, you know, Longstreet had this thing for Pickett, and because he always felt he had to hover over Pickett and kind of keep a hand on him. I think he thought Pickett was a bit impetuous in what he did. In fact, he almost got the United States and Great Britain in a war at Puget Sound back in the 1850s, because he had started something over there when he was posted in the army before the war. So anyway, so he always liked to be close to Pickett, keep his hand on him to guide him in what he was doing. So to his old brigade, Pettigrew said, now Colonel, and it was Marshall, said, now Colonel, for the honor of the good old North State, forward. And they began moving across. Soon after emerging from the trees, moving at the rate of about 100 yards per minute, the lines began taking long-range artillery fire from the Federal guns that are now back in position. Sometimes 10 or more men would fall with each direct hit. The lines continued to dress down to the colors. When it gets near the low area, out here in front, Mayo's brigade, which was Brockenberg's brigade on the first day, that was beside Pettigrew on the afternoon attack, now under Mayo because Brockenberg's been wounded, gets out there, and they receive some fire from the edge of the village, close to where these houses are, but of course it was outside of the village, but the 8th Ohio was out there. And they had been posted the evening before, and they were kind of a tripwire kind of unit. And they fired into Mayo's brigade, and they broke and ran for the rear. Now they had also been a little late getting out. They started about 50 yards behind everybody else, and they were kind of trying to catch up, and they were just kind of disorganized. And when they got fire on from the flank, they broke and ran. And one of the things that's interesting about that, you know, after the battle, all the Richmond papers, and even including Pickett, blamed the North Carolinians for breaking and leaving him exposed on his left. No, it was Mayo's Virginians that broke and ran. So anyway, let's see. Okay, meanwhile, Pickett's brigades continued their left obliques and made their link up with Pettigrew just short of the Emmitsburg Road. So you can see what Emmitsburg Road is. You see where that white vehicle is moving. That's the Emmitsburg Road. Yeah. So they made their advance together. Now, one of the things that happened yesterday when we were coming up, you know, there was a big monument, and I think it's one of those tall ones, and I forgot which. We'll be going over there later. It's a monument to the Vermont Brigade, and they had been in here, and they had not been under fire yet in this battle. They had been coming up, and they were due to be released from the army at the end of July. So their commander said, we need to get into this thing. So they advanced out and wheeled, did it for them, a right wheel into the so they could fire into the flank of Pickett's division, and sat out there and started just blasting away as Pickett's division was moving forward. Of course, there was also artillery firing from everywhere on the Federal line, including Little Round Top were firing into these guys, and it was just wreaking havoc as they went forward. Again, while waiting for the Confederates, Major General Hayes on the Federal side ordered his men to drill in the manual of arms and to steady them and to keep them from thinking about the coming battle. along the federal lines, you started hearing shouts of Fredericksburg, 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 because at Fredericksburg, who held the wall? Confederates. And they had to advance in the open like this. So this was now, it's our turn. Fredericksburg, Fredericksburg. At times the Confederates brigades would move too close to, and you'd hear the words of, "Don't crowd, boys, move over, cousins. You're drawing the fire our way." And as the artillery began to tear these greater and greater holes in the lines, there was a lieutenant who shouted, "Home, boys, home." It's over those hills. Y'all have to forgive me a little bit. This is some touching stuff.
Yeah, you're right.
And when the lines reached the Emmitsburg Road, they crossed the fences and reformed their lines in the road only about 250 yards from the stone wall. Here, the first canister and volleys of musket fire made a perfect hailstorm of lead. One federal officer wrote, "Their graceful lines underwent an instantaneous transformation. In a dense cloud of smoke and dust, arms, heads, blankets, guns, knapsacks were tossed into the clear air. A moan went up from the field, distinctly to be heard amid the storm of battle."
Now the fence was there. The fence.
Yes.
Yeah. And they had
Now
to
this-
tear it down. Or,
Now this fence was not like these little fences like you see right here. The fences along that road were a little bit hardier construction, and the posts were actually planted about 2 feet deep in the ground. And then they had those, well, it was kind of constructed like these. You'll see it up there when we drive over there a little later. You'll be able to see that. And you couldn't just push the fences down. You had to crawl over them. So you had to get out of formation, had to hand your musket to somebody and crawl over, all the time being shot at.
Yeah.
Get your musket back and advance across the road and do it again, because there was a fence on each side of the road. And all of the time you're getting blasted away, and you really can't, because you were told not to fire until you get up there. Colonel James Hodges of the 14th Virginia at the front of was in front of the copse of trees about 10 yards in front of the battery. When the battery fired its charge of double canister, not a single Confederate was left standing. Their mutilated bodies 3 deep. Brigadier General Armistead shouted as his brigade neared the wall, "Come on, boys, give them the cold steel, and who will follow me?" And with that, he led the remnants of his brigade over the wall and seized the battery, and at that time he was mortally wounded. Now, I'm going to stop right here.
Alright, we just left the Virginia monument. We are crossing the battlefield, walking all the way to the stone wall.
Oh, okay. Alright, so we're here at the North Carolina hot water mall.
We're gonna get talking real quick so we can get through this so we don't get soaked out here. Anyway, the Confederates get here, and as they get to the Emmitsburg Road here, they have to cross those two fences, and pretty much that's the good limit of musket and canister fire. So it really goes into the Confederates as they're coming, and they keep coming up here. Now over on this side is where Pickett's Virginians are, where you see the nice area. So they were coming in over there, right on the copse of trees over there. Armisen shouted to his brigade as they neared the wall, "Come on, boys, give them the cold steel. Who will follow me?" And that he led the remnants of his brigade over the wall and seized the battery, and at that time he was mortally wounded. And that's, you see that with that the Mason. So he gave the, and I'm not a Mason, but it's a Mason sign of distress, and they give that, and any other Mason is bound to honor that and aid you.
Yeah, that.
So that would have been
his monument right there in front of those cannons.
Yeah.
That's where he fell.
Got up here, and it said when he actually put his hand on the wheel of the cannon is when he was shot and went down. Of course, you know the story behind being friends with Hancock, and that was played up fairly well in the movie about that. And they had been friends, close personal friends before the war, as a lot of these, especially the officers, had been. They had been friends before the war. But that is as far as the Virginians got there. North Carolina, Pettigrew's old brigade, now in the Marshall, is coming through here, and they get up to this point here. And as was said, you know, we got up here, and over here at the angle, Pettigrew's troops gave the rebel yell and made it to the wall. The 26th North Carolina made the farthest advance. The enemy fire reducing their ranks to almost nothing. Only 2 men were left of the 26th when they got to the wall: Sergeant J.M. Brooks and Private Daniel Thomas. They were carrying the regimental colors, planted them on the wall, and looking around saw no one behind them. One Federal mercifully called out, "Come on over to this side of the Lord," and they surrendered. Just brought them right over, instead of shooting them down. The assault was over. Those that could retreated back across to Seminary Ridge. The ground was covered with the dead and the wounded, and those wounded giving the ground the look of a mass of crawling insects. One Virginia captain wrote, "We gained nothing but glory and lost our bravest men." Of the 12,500 men who made the charge, 5,000 were either killed or captured. Another 2,500 were wounded during the bombardment or were able to return to their lines from the assault. For the 26th North Carolina, only 70 men were present for duty after the attack. And again, they had started out on July 1st with a little over 800 men. Lost 588 on 1 July, recovered 18 slightly wounded that got back in the line, and made the attack with 230, and they lost another 160 in this assault. Lee met the men afterward as they returned, and he came out from where the monument is. It's kind of where the point was where y'all started from.
Yeah.
And he said, "All this will come right in the end. We'll talk it over and after, but right now, in the meantime, all good men must rally. We want all good men and true men just now." Lee expected
Meade to launch a counterattack at any time, so he began issuing orders for his men to reform. To Pickett, he said, "General Pickett, place your division in rear of this hill and be ready to repel the advance of the enemy should they follow up their advantage." And Pickett replied, "General Lee, I have no division now. Armistead is down, Garnett is down, Kemper is mortally wounded." He said, "Come, General Pickett, this has been my fight, and upon my shoulders rests the blame. The men and officers of your command have written the name of Virginia as high today as has ever been written before. Your men have done all that men could do. The fault is entirely my own." The Brigadier General Wilcox, Lee said, "Never mind, General, all this has been my fault. It is I who have lost the fight, and you must help me out of this the best way you can." This was stunning.
Yeah.
Lee took all the blame. And that's what a commander does. You get the allocades, you do good things, and you should rightfully take the blame when things go bad. A lot of people are quick to try to shift it to somebody else, but good commanders don't do that.
Who are the best?
Yeah, and there's plenty of that to go around. And just to let you know about Pickett's brigadiers, Garnett, you know, I may have mentioned y'all, if y'all heard all this about his honor had been, you know, he had been held for court-martial by Jackson for withdrawing without orders in the previous battle, and of course he had never had his court-martial clear his name. And he felt like his honor had been besmirched and he had not got the satisfaction of correcting it. He had been kicked by his horse a few days before and he almost couldn't walk. So they were going to cross, so he was going to ride his horse, and Armistead told him, says, "You can't do that. You will be the perfect target. They'll know you're a high-ranking officer on a horse." And he said, "I have to do it. I have to do it." And so he got up here, and people said they never found his body, and the thought was he was hit by a canister round. Because there was nothing there, but his horse was running back with blood all over the sides of it. His horse went back. Armistead, of course, we know about Armistead. He lived 2 or 3 days after this, mortally wounded, and passed away. A lot of people thought that the wound should not be mortal, but maybe from exhaustion and a lot of other things, his age and, you know, whatever, it just all added up. And maybe a broken heart too. And Kemper was not mortally wounded. He did survive. I think he had a limp and some other issues from his wound, but he did survive, eventually survived the battle. Now, the next day, Lee told Longstreet, "It's all my fault. I thought my men were invincible." Some of the men still felt that way. One told Lee, "We'll fight them, sir, till hell freezes over." And then, "Sir, we will fight them on the ice." That's the Southern soldier. And just after the battle, Brigadier General Alfred Pleasanton, cavalry chief for the Federals, told Meade, "I will give you half an hour to show yourself a great general. Order the army to advance, and we will finish the campaign in a week." Meade replied, "We have done well enough today," and he didn't go forward. Now, after this, Meade is going to be roundly criticized for not doing that. And a lot of people were dissatisfied with Meade and thought he ought to be relieved of command. But he did win a victory here. You know, not a complete total, you know, victory, but it was a victory. He stopped the Confederate advance into Pennsylvania. Jeremy, you want to know about casualties? Here we go. For the Federal Army, killed in action, 3,155. Wounded, 14,525.
Missing in action, captured 5,365 for a total of 23,045. For the Confederates, killed 2,632, wounded 12,809. Missing in action, captured 5,247 for 20,688. After assessing the Army's condition, Lee said we must now return to Virginia. Throughout the night, Lee issued orders for the withdrawal. On the 4th of July, a deluge of rain fell and began to wash the blood from the rocks, the grass, and the ground. Brigadier General John M. Bowden's cavalry escorted the 17-mile-long train of wagons that held the wounded that could be moved. 17 miles long. Wow. And these wagons had no springs, so these men were loaded on there and bounced. And I don't think he can imagine the pain these men were going through. And one other thing, the ride in the wagons was merciless for the wounded. The rest of the army soon followed. Now, that wagon train, as they moved west, they were constantly harassed and attacked by Federal cavalry and civilians who would come out with axes and whack at the wagon wheels and whatever else they could of these men. Just absolutely despicable against wounded men. I think that constituted a war crime, but anyway. All right. When the Army reached the Potomac, it was flooded and Lee ordered entrenchments dug to repel the Federals. However, the Federals did not attack and followed the Confederates slowly. On the 14th of July, the Confederates finally were able to cross the Potomac. Federal cavalry finally attacked just as the rear guard began to cross. And guess who was the rear guard of the Army?
26.
Pettigrew's old brigade. Brigadier General Pettigrew was mortally wounded in this action, and thus the officer who started the battle ended it. Lincoln told his secretary John Hay, "We had them in our grasp. We had only to stretch forth our hands and they were ours, and nothing I could say or do could make the Army move." In his report to President Jefferson Davis at the end of the month, Lee wrote, "The conduct of the troops was all that I could desire or expect, and they deserved success so far as can be deserved by heroic valor and fortitude. More may have been required of them than they were able to perform, but my admiration of them, of their noble qualities and confidence in their ability to cope successfully with the enemy has suffered no abatement from the issue of this protracted and sanguinary conflict." Lee offered, along with that, his resignation. Of course, we know that Davis did not accept it, and he would go on to keep the Army together. Now, the last place they crossed it is a place called Falling Waters. It's about, 15 miles north of here or so? And several years ago, we were able to go there. And were you there with us when we did that? Okay. And it looks nothing like what you would imagine. But we were there, and you could see how it all unfolded, how the Federal cavalry, actually it was Federal cavalry that just kind of snuck in and attacked, and what happened is Pettigrew got up to defend himself and pulled his pistol, and it misfired, and a Federal shot him and gut shot him. And of course the Federal that was cavalryman was on that horse, was pulled off his horse, and they said they beat him to death with a fence post or a rock or something.
Yeah, it was a rock.
But they did manage to get across there at Falling Waters.
Okay.
And I think the property has changed hands now, and they don't let people come there.
George Frank still owns that.
Oh, he does?
Yes, sir, he does.
Do they still let people
He
come
lets
there?
people in there. Yep, if you want a tour of that, you talk to I could get you contact for George Frank if you're ever up this way.
Okay, we might want to get that.
He owns the house. And still
Yep.
I had heard, somebody had told me that the property had been sold and you couldn't get there.
Yeah.
That's good to know.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe in October when we're up here we can do that.
I'm not sure if we'll have time or not unless we
I don't know,
today, but we'll,
if we have the opportunity, pedigree, you know, when he was gut shot, of course, that was generally it was fatal.
It'll be a living history.
But when he was wounded
invited
on
up here.
this side of the Potomac, and he said, "Do not leave me behind. Take me across." He said, "Well, General, if we move you, we know that it will be mortal."
Yeah.
He said, "I'm not going to be left behind," because he had already been captured once in the war, early in the war.
He died
In the 7 days, he had been captured, wounded and captured, and said he didn't want to go through that again because he had to be exchanged and all that, to go through all of that.
Where that big monument is, you kind of see through the trees up there, that is actually where Lincoln gave the address.
Okay.
Now, before we start, I want everybody to understand, I'm a Southerner. I'm not very fond of Lincoln, of course. But the man did have a way with words. And I will also say this, that when he was assassinated, it was the worst thing for the South that ever happened. Because the evidence in my reading says that we would not have had Reconstruction had he lived. We would not have had to go through that. It would have been kind of a forgive, not forget, but forgive. And the nation would have been put back together a whole lot better. And I also say this, and sometimes, of course, when I have some black folks in the audience, that because of Reconstruction that was jammed down our throats, created a lot of racial issues that we still have today.
Yeah.
And I've had a lot of blacks say, I agree with you on that. But anyway, that stated. Let's talk about the Gettysburg Address. And I'm going to talk about it, not just the address itself. I'm going to read the address later. To me, this address is more about soldiers than anything. It can be used anywhere at a military cemetery. To me, the words just are so meaningful. But let's talk a little bit about the Gettysburg Address. Let's see, like the page is a little bit stuck together. All right.
Pretty good.
And I titled this part around the Gettysburg Address, "The Virtue of Brevity." Much has been said about, written about people who are able to express themselves by crafting long, flowing, sometimes overly verbose compositions to get across their viewpoint on any subject. While this is perfectly acceptable in many situations, there are times when just the opposite of true and brevity is much more desired. It is a gift to be able to get across your message in a brief, concise manner. A perfect case for this involves Lincoln's Gettysburg Address. And let me set the stage for this. After the battle, 3 July 1863, the citizens of Gettysburg desired to establish a national cemetery for the remains of the federal dead. The local citizens established a site next to Evergreen Cemetery in Gettysburg and picked the date of 19 November 1863 for the dedication. I'll move a little closer. In September, the distinguished orator Edward Everett of Massachusetts was asked to deliver the main address. Now remember that. He is asked to do the main address, not Lincoln. Later, some of the citizens felt that maybe the president ought to be invited, and an invitation was tendered in late October. Now remember, November 19th is the date. Since Edward Everett was the main speaker, it was decided that Lincoln be asked to make a few remarks. It is the desire that after the oration, you as chief executive of the nation formally set apart these grounds to those grounds to their sacred use by a few appropriate remarks. Lincoln accepted the invitation on the 2nd of November, and due to the demands of the presidency, he was unable to give much thought to the occasion until the day before the event. Okay. News that the president would appear at Gettysburg soon reached the papers, and his appearance was less than enthusiastic. It was feared that his appearance would be construed as a political event instead of honoring war dead. On the 18th of November, Lincoln left Washington by train for Gettysburg with a few dignitaries and his close friend, Ward Layman. Finally away from the other duties that occupied his time, Lincoln was finally able to work on the remarks in his private compartment. Arriving in Gettysburg soon after sundown, Lincoln went to the home of Judge David Willis, located on the town square, and finished working on his remarks. By morning, the crowd in Gettysburg had swelled to around 15,000. The official party began to move from the town square at 11. Lincoln led the official party to the cemetery. Lincoln was riding a horse and he started being erect in the saddle, but soon was noted as riding slightly slumped with his head bowed as if in deep thought. The ceremony began at noon with a prayer by the house chaplain and followed by the introduction of Everett. Everett launched into his address. He covered almost every subject concerning the war from its beginning to the action at Gettysburg. It lasted 2 hours. And most of these people were standing up. They weren't seats. They were most of them just standing up. Not uncommon for an important oration of the day. As Everett began to close, Lincoln pulled a copy of his speech from his pocket, put on his spectacles, and read over the text. When Everett finished, it was met with long and enthusiastic applause that took his seat. After a special song composed for the event, Layman rose and introduced the president simply as the President of the United States. So this is the Gettysburg Address. And be forewarned. 407 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation or any nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure. We are met on a great battlefield of that war. We have come to dedicate a portion of the field as a final resting place for those who here gave their lives that the nation might live. It is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this. But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. The brave men, living and dead, who struggled here, have consecrated it far above our poor power to add or detract. The world will little note nor long remember what we say here, but they can never forget what they did here. It is for us, the living, rather, to be dedicated here to the unfinished work for which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause of which they gave the last full measure of devotion, that we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, and for the people shall not perish from the earth. Of course, Lincoln reached the rostrum and began his speech. Realizing that Everett had taken 2 hours to deliver his speech, the photographer who was taking his time setting up the camera, and because of the very animated endeavor, drew the attention of many of the spectators. Lincoln's speech was over in about 2 minutes, so fast that the photographer did not get a photo of the president until he had taken his seat. It also stunned the crowd, as only delayed and sporadic applause resulted. As he took his seat, Lincoln felt he had disappointed the crowd and turned to Layman and said, "Layman, that speech won't scour. It is a flat failure and the people are disappointed." Now, for those of you that are not farm related, scour is a term for a moldboard plow for the dirt to come right over and not stick. means you're getting a good job done. And he said, that speech won't scour. Lincoln was not the only person who was disappointed. Several of the nation's newspapers were less than kind in their appraisal. Here are two of their comments. We pass over the silly remarks of the president. For the credit of the nation, we are willing that the veil of oblivion shall be dropped over them, and that they shall no more be repeated or thought of. And that was from a Harrisburg, Pennsylvania newspaper. Chicago Times wrote this. Mr. Lincoln did most foully traduce the motives of the men who were slain at Gettysburg. With ignorant rudeness, insulted the memory of the dead. Readers will not have failed to observe the exceedingly bad taste which characterized the remarks of the president at the dedication of the Soldiers' Cemetery at Gettysburg. The cheek of every American must tingle with shame as he reads of the silly, flat, dishwatery words of the man who has to be pointed out to intelligent foreigners as the President of the United States. Can y'all think of another president that was treated this way by what he said? George W. Bush was treated the same way. Okay. Yet by the next day, Edward Everett sent Lincoln the following message. I should be glad if I could flatter myself that I came to the central idea of the occasion in 2 hours as you did in 2 minutes. All others also thought well of the speech. Sir Winston Churchill, quite a noted speaker and orator of himself, thought the Gettysburg Address is one of the 2 greatest speeches in the English language. And so, as I write this, in a rather long-winded manner, I hope that you can see there is virtue in brevity. So this is, this is why I like to close this here. It's a fitting place, a cemetery, even though it's a federal cemetery for them. A lot of our soldiers were disinterred, and some of them were eventually sent down to Hollywood or either Blanford Cemetery and reinterred. And there are a few that rest in Raleigh at the cemetery that your camp looks after when they're allowed to, I guess. To me, the Gettysburg Address is for any soldier of any time, and it strikes real close to home. When my son was in Iraq and I was up here doing these tours, it was incredibly difficult for me to get through this. And sometimes it still is. I did pretty good today. I got through it. So, okay, with that, does anybody have any questions?
My question is one that troubles me.
I got it.
Oh, okay. Maybe somebody got it.
No.
It is clear
I need to lean on.
that the Gettysburg dead from North Carolina were a far larger number than what rests in Oakwood Cemetery that came back from the disinterment that were orchestrated by the ladies of North Carolina. Now, I realize some of the Gettysburg dead went to Blanford Cemetery, but could you assume that the rest of the dead, the difference, were gotten by their families and interred in North Carolina, or are there still?
There are any number of ways, and I don't think anybody will ever know for sure. You can speculate that Hollywood Cemetery, Blanford Cemetery, Raleigh, there's probably some other state cemeteries that may have found some of their soldiers. There's some families that may have, Burgwin, his family eventually found him and took him home. There are others that were moved, and most were given a soldier's burial on the field, which is mainly probably 6 to 8 inches of dirt piled on top of them. That was all they did. A lot of them, they say, the Federals managed to get most of the Confederate dead disinterred and moved somewhere. Some of them we may never know where they ended up. because I'm sure that the federal government did not afford them any special status at that time. So they could have been placed somewhere in unmarked graves, or just a marker like at some of the POW camps where they just put up one big marker at some point after the war to dedicate it to them. We'll never know. I guess not until resurrection morning, then they're all gonna pop up, but here we are.
Well, yeah. Yeah.
It's safe to assume there's still many out there that are.
There's probably some. There's probably some still out there. Every now and then they will come across somebody. I remember several years ago, they found somebody in the railroad cut. The rain finally washed him away, and they determined that he was a North Carolinian by buttons on his that were
North Carolina
left on his jacket. So he was brought home, and I remember that at that point we were allowed to have a coffin built, and he was put in the state capitol, and we built an honor guard over him and buried him in Oakwood Cemetery.
Right.
Are there still out there? Yes. Yeah. They're out there everywhere. My ancestor that was killed over First Day, I feel confident that he got a quick burial with other members of the 26th. At some point, probably the Federals got there and dug them up and moved them somewhere where I have no idea. I have no idea.